Okay, gang, it looks like we are live and that everything is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Welcome to the stream, whether you're watching on Rumble or YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube and you make a comment, I'll be able to highlight it through StreamYard and have it appear on the screen so everyone can see what we're talking about and why. If you're on Rumble and you make a comment or you ask a question, you have an observation to share, I will read it aloud and we'll still talk about it. We just won't have the visual reference, but it'll all be there. So, thank you for being here. Very much appreciated. I've got poll results for you today. We're going to be talking a little bit about how my own personal evolution about thinking about spirituality locally, how that is all going. Oh, and it looks like Rumble just let me down. That is very irritating. Well, it looks like we will just have to download the stream afterwards and see what happens there. But you know, what can you do? Anyway, we will be talking about the impact of taking a more localized viewpoint on spirituality, as well as considering the question of whether or not we can see signs of an American pantheon of gods forming. Specifically, are the ancestral gods, are they coming together in some sort of arrangement? How can we tell? Is this happening at all? What would be some indicators to look for? We've got a lot to go over. So, glad you are here. Now, poll results. To forgive me for consulting my little notebook here. The first poll I asked is this. If you were to create an American pagan holiday calendar, would you include cultural celebrations such as Thanksgiving and or secular celebrations such as Independence Day, or would you not? 92% of those who responded said yes, both cultural and secular celebrations, and 8% said no, include neither. So we have that. Then the second poll I held, I built on this theme and I asked the question, has Labor Day been sufficiently Americanized to be worth embracing both culturally and spiritually? Now, that whole question came up just because the origins of Labor Day come from very leftist Marxist thoughts. And of course, that's the kind of philosophy that has been destroying the country. We don't exactly want to celebrate things that come from that. But in this country, what I have seen is that on Labor Day, it seems to be more so about celebrating the end of summer. It's, kind of a common cultural marker for that. The school year's back in swing. There are awesome sales. It's people's last long weekend to get to the beach, get to the lake, go out in the woods and be, fairly comfortable weather and just enjoy themselves and have a good long rest before, we pick things up and go back into the grind until the next holiday season comes back around. And of course, there's nothing wrong in and of itself about celebrating people who actually perform productive labor. If only more people perform productive labor, that would be pretty fantastic. So that's why it came up, but it is a complicated question, and the results were interesting. We had 56 of respondents saying yes, it's fine now. We've evolved it. 33% said yes with misgivings, and 11% were not sure. So and that's fair enough because and there isn't a right or wrong. This is just absolutely canvassing how do people feel? Where are people at about this sort of thing? Then our third poll was, should American pagans use ancestral terms and other languages to describe our holy days and spiritual concepts? Or should we use the translation of those terms? 64% said plain English. 9% said ancestral terms, 27% said, I'm not sure. And again, I mean, that's a pretty controversial issue. Although I think it is always worth repeating that our ancestors used the terms that they used because that was their language. It was the commonality of it. It's what was customary. And there's nothing that's inherently holier about using terms in foreign languages of an earlier period versus terms we would recognize today. It's really a question of understanding for sure. Then poll number 4. If you need healing for a gender specific issue and you decide to consult the gods for help, do you choose a deity of the same gender, the opposite gender, or do you think it matters? 30% said the same gender, 60% said it does not matter, and 10% asked, how did this question even come up in your brain? Which is a fair point. I don't remember this being brought up in any other circles before, but it popped in my head, and so here we are. My curiosity shall be satisfied. Then poll number 5. What do you think is a good place for new pagans to begin their studies and why? 11% said learn the traits of a pagan worldview. 11% said study the gods and goddesses. 34% said history, 11% said come to terms with past religious experiences and then begins your studies, and 33% said others. There was actually a really good involved conversation on this, which, if you want to find out more about that, you will have to join Blackbird's Brew on Gilded. So then, poll number 6. Is it correct or incorrect to say that the concepts of honoring the gods, pursuing excellence, and respecting the natural order are common threads in most forms of paganism? 90% said correct, 10% said incorrect. I would have liked for those who said incorrect to kind of elaborated on why they thought that might be, but as of yet, that has not occurred. And if you happen to vote incorrect on that, I mean, please absolutely share your thoughts. What is your line of reasoning on this? Because it seems like the overwhelming common understanding is that these concepts are pretty common amongst most forms of paganism. And looking for that common ground between various pagan paths and figuring out where we actually do come together and where we might have some shared space, that's a big thing in this project. Now, poll number 7. If you were asked to create a new calendar, because we know throughout history various calendars have come and gone, but if you were going to make a calendar and it was only up to you, how would you arrange it? 28% said by lunar cycles. 28% said astrologically, essentially the beginning and the ending of various sun signs would serve as the new months. And, I kind of lean that direction myself if it was up to me, because right now, the astrological signs, they begin and end, kind of in the middle of the month, and it feels a little odd, and you're always transitioning and you never really feel, I don't know. It feels unsettling somehow. So if we were going to change it up, I would lean towards the astrological. 57% said some kind of seasonal arrangement. And then 14% said other, I've got a cool idea. But sadly, no one elaborated about what that cool idea was, which made me very sad because I would love to hear about it. 1,000%, I would very much like to hear about it. I mean, if you have a different concept and you have the really interesting listening, don't keep that to yourself. I mean, brainstorm with us. Then poll number 8, it asked, do you venerate your American ancestors as well as your ancestors from across the sea, or no? 100% said yes, both American and other ancestors. So that was pretty encouraging to see. Because I think I've wondered about it. I've wondered if we are so enamored with our pagan ancestors who lived in very different lands that we have forgotten about our ancestors that are actually buried in the soil where we live. So apparently we remember both, and that's very good. Poll number 9, do you venerate your Christian ancestors as well as your pagan ancestors? 91% said yes, both Christian and pagan ancestors. 9% said that they hadn't done either yet. So there's that. Now, poll number 10. What is the spiritual significance of summer to you? 30% said abundance, the explosion of life. 20% said relaxation and blessings. 20% said I'm melting and you want me to get philosophical, which fair enough. And 30% said other. And again, that was another source of a very interesting back and forth conversation. So if you are interested in that, please, by all means, definitely check that out. Okay, I'm getting another message about Rumble being difficult. So again, I'm just going to download this stream after we're done and upload it on Rumble. Never gets as many views that way, but it's up there at least for those who are interested. Let's see. Our next poll was poll number 11. Would you like to see American paganism be the no bullshit paganism? 100% of respondents said yes. And I thought that there was a hunger for this sort of thing, but it is very nice to see that my instincts were not misplaced and there are other people on this similar wavelength, because a lot of floofy nonsense can get involved and the resurrection of paganism. And some people have turned it into such this elitist, I'm more academic than you are, kind of pursuit that not only is it antagonizing people in general, which it absolutely is, but it's also forgetting some very real historical facts that pagan religions, they weren't just the religions of the kings or the priests or the elites or the educated classes. These were the religions of the tradesmen and the farmers and even of the slaves and everything else. No matter what your state foundation of life. Paganism, it was a religion of the actual people, all of the people. It had relevance to everyone, even though certain deities were more relevant depending upon, what your situation in life was. Um, but people forget about that seemingly in the here and now. And possibly it's because we have to do so much study just to uncover what the principles were, why people celebrated the things that they did, what we know of their procedures about how they conducted ritual and why. I mean, that does involve a great deal. And I've been very afraid people get so lost in that they forget the actual point, that it's about practicing it. And once you understand the basic concepts, one of the biggest services we can do is to become good communicators who can adequately explain, the basic thought process and the basic premises of all these things, so that, for one, when they go through that, they already have um, they have some sense of proportion about what it is we're actually looking for already in their heads. It spares them a little bit of mental wear and tear that could probably be better directed in dealing with their own personal issues and actually applying their spiritual knowledge in such a manner that it improves their own lives. And why make the song and dance about it for something that was always available to everyone? Why turn it into this rigmarole? I mean, I don't know why some people are doing that, but I'm glad to see that at least at Blackbird's Brew, people are not interested in doing that anymore. Poll number 12 got into something fairly controversial. If you've looked up astrological information on places like Pinterest or other sites, from time to time you'll probably see something pop up about, are the Celtic zodiac, or this is the Native American zodiac. Now, I don't know what the cosmology of any Native American tribe was. I'm sure they all had different ideas that were very personal to, where they lived and what was customary for their people. I don't know if they associated times of birth with any particular animals or events or anything else like that. I don't know. But if we set all of that aside, and we just look at various animals that have been assigned to serve as the equivalents of the astrological names with which we are familiar. And, it's kind of interesting. I just wanted to see, and I asked people, later on, if did you relate to this at all? Is there anything in this? Did they at least choose sensible equivalencies? Whoever came up with this, and more often than not, people say like, yeah, I do see. I feel some sense of familiarity with this. Now, for the falcon, which correlates with the sign of Aries, we had one person. Same with the beaver, representing Taurus. For Gemini, it's the deer, which is one. Um, we don't have any cancers in our group, or at least none responded to the poll, but that's represented by the woodpecker. Leos are salmons, which is me. We have one. Then bears, Virgo. Ravens are the Libras, which is one. Owls are Sagittarians. We have one. The goose, which is Capricorn, is one. Oh, and I forgot, I skipped right over. Scorpios are the equivalents of snakes in this. Then otters are the equivalent of Aquarians. We have two. And we have wolf for Pisces, which is one. And one of our group members, Ro, hello, Ro, she started kind of correlating and plugging in these Native American, these American zodiac equivalencies into her chart. And she started seeing, oh, okay, maybe there is something in this. She felt like they did a pretty good job of representing the kind of energy that she had, at least in her top three placements. And so I plugged in my own chart, and not only did I feel like what those animals and their symbolism represented, that it was correlating with those specific planets in my own chart, I also felt like I came away with a more instinctive sense of how these energies are actually coming together. Maybe it's because it's using the metaphor of the animal spirits, and that's a bit more familiar. Or maybe it's just because, I mean, these are all native species to this place. I don't know, but it helped break through a little bit of something that goes along with looking into astrology. I do find it mind-numbingly complicated. So those people who are able to do anything that makes it a little bit more straightforward and intuitive and instinctive, I salute them. And I would like to encourage them and to continue doing that in their own work, because my goodness, that is needed. I mean, that goes right back again to having a desire for a no bullshit paganism. Not everything has to be this complicated, obscure thing. I mean, we get enough of that when we were actually thinking about various forms of witchcraft and like, okay, what natural law can we actually be sure of? Or are we really sure how these laws actually interact and together? Because sometimes we get results that surprise us. There's a lot of different factors that can make life extremely difficult as we're studying the craft. Um, so, I mean, there is a certain amount of complication that's going to be unavoidable for that. But just for devotional paganism, I don't think it has to be this big song and dance. I think what we're really looking for are common principles that we learn, we see in the natural world, we see reflected in the gods, and to just kind of go things along with that. I think it's going to be okay if we start acting a little bit more intuitively. Let's see. Now, poll number 13. What are your thoughts on aliens? This is in reference to the live stream Georgia Liberty and I did yesterday because, the subject of the aliens and how that being brought up, so conspicuously while we have other big stuff going on, we did find that significant. And so I just asked the group for fun what they thought. 10% think they exist, but that they haven't visited us. 10% say they are absolutely exist and they have visited us all over the world. 20% say, oh, no, no. Then we have another 10% that said that aliens inspired mythology through their misunderstood technology. That's essentially the ancient astronaut position. And it was interesting to see that someone in the group does tend to lean that direction. Then we have 20% that aliens do visit, and eventually we'll probably find out about their spiritual beliefs and that we'll learn about the gods that are native to their own worlds. And then 50% had other, and oh, there were so many interesting ideas. And if you want to hear about those, you've got to visit Blackbird's Brew on Gilded. Now, poll number 14. What spiritual environment do you feel the most spiritually attuned with? I put this up this morning, so people are still answering, but I checked where everything stood right before I went live. 43% said forest, 15% said caves, 14% said rivers and streams, 14% said the desert, and 14% said the mountain. So, I mean, it's interesting. And of course, I mean, this isn't to say that we can't become spiritually attuned in a wide variety of environments, especially the ones that are local to where we live. We absolutely can, but it is about, where are you most comfortable? Where do you really feel that? So it's been interesting to hear what people say. So, thinking locally, as part of this, and kind of my overall path, it has been pushing me towards this direction of paying a great deal more attention to the energies of where I actually live. What is the land doing? What is it saying to me? And before I went live, I actually stood outside for a few minutes. I was just had my shoes off. I was just grounding a little bit, and I was listening more than anything else. I wasn't even trying to process or try to label anything that I was experiencing. I was just listening and in retrospect, there was, I don't know, it was just such a subtle feeling, lots of nuance of, and not so much of, everything that you need is, going to be found in the details, but more so pay attention, not just to the things that stand out, but also to the things that you tend to take for granted. It's interesting. It's very interesting when you just plug in like that because I mean, sometimes when we're grounding, we're just trying to get out energy that we don't want in our systems anymore, which is a perfectly valid use for grounding. But sometimes when you're grounding and you're plugging in and you're allowing to have an exchange of energy, and that is an opportunity for the land and the spirits associated with it to really speak to you. So that's what I did today. And I don't know. I have some things to think about just because it wasn't loud. There was nothing bombastic about it. It wasn't making any kind of demands. Maybe because we're in the middle of summer, but just the land in general, I've never really felt it to be particularly demanding. I didn't feel like it was going out of its way to nurturing, but by connecting to it, I was being nurtured. And so I need to think about those impressions. So if you've been engaging in that practice, tell me what you've been observing because I bet it's very revealing. I'd like to start comparing notes between people of different regions and seeing just what impressions are they coming away with. I've also been giving thought to things that are man-made that are on the landscape. What feels like it's kind of a successful grafting, and what just feels really out of place. Now, this is a really tough one because, of course, our own personal preferences and prejudices are absolutely going to color what we think fits in and what we think doesn't. But still, nevertheless, I'm trying to take a more dispassionate view and just listen to what feels like it flows naturally together. And of course, the man-made is something that we have to take into consideration because, we are human. We make the things. That is part of what our species does. And it makes a great deal of difference if we are making things that are compatible. I'm not saying an expression of the land itself, but compatible with the land. And the thing that just keeps coming back in my mind over and over again, and this is absolutely because I've always lived in a very rural area of Missouri, it's those white farmhouses you see dotted around the landscape, and they're not all painted white, and they don't all have the same architectural style exactly. Some are more of a folk Victorian, others are very colonial, and you kind of see those high Victorian and those neoclassical bones reflected in them. Just simplified, calmer, a lot, not so ostentatious. I mean, you see a lot of that, but you still come away with it of not thinking about necessarily the origins of some of its designs, but rather what it has become. Just this very simple, very serviceable, very family oriented kind of house. And that's really what I think of when I think of the American farmhouse, that white farmhouse. I mean, the countryside is just dotted with them, and we need to preserve them because a lot of them are getting older, and I'm sick of us just tearing things down because they need a little bit of maintenance. But there's something about them. You look at them and they just feel right. They don't just look right, they just feel right. It's like, this is an appropriate kind of dwelling. It's centered on the right kind of work that is intended for this land, which is to cultivate it and to raise animals on it and, do the things that enable human life to thrive. And it felt right. And when I think of other kinds of dwellings, there's a lot of different houses you will see in the countryside, and some are, you would see them in any neighborhood in any suburban town. I mean, and they just look weird, like they don't belong there, almost as if the ground upon which they're built is like, "What you doing? I don't. What? Who are these people? What is this building? It feels funny. This is farmland and pastures and everything else. It feels off-putting. Whereas, the more vernacular styles, the ones that are a little bit more centered on that agricultural lifestyle, they just seem to be a successful graft where others are not. So I found that significant. And of course, that also has me thinking about, appropriate gardening styles. Every region in the world tends to develop its own gardening style. And so I've been thinking about what really fits, what actually looks right for this environment, because if it looks right and it feels right, that also means that the spiritual and magical energies are compatible, and that is going to lead to a more successful outcome. So that's something I've been keeping in mind. Another thing is that I haven't just been, when I've been trying to become more attuned to local energies, I'm not just looking at the animals and plants. I'm not just looking at what's man-made that seems to fit. I'm also considering things like the weather. Now, the reason why is because our weather patterns, they have been a bit unusual this year, but also the weather in Missouri, it always seems to be the weather that other regions of this continent are done with. And once they're done with it, it comes into Missouri, we whirl it around in a little blender, and whatever shoots out is what our weather happens to be, at least for the next 5 minutes. I mean, everything you might have heard about weather shifting with the mood in the Midwest, 100% true all of the time. And so I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about how we just get echoes of what other people got in a much more stronger fashion. And one thing that recently happened was, all of that smoke from those wildfires in Canada, that have been so badly affecting the eastern seaboard. Well, I mean, all the winds, they've been taking them right down into the South and parts of the Midwest. I mean, and we're not as badly affected as other areas, not by a long shot. I don't think we're getting, air quality alerts or anything like that. So, I mean, I don't want to make out like, we are suffering because, we're not. But yesterday, there was this really odd haze, this kind of yellowy haze that was everywhere. It clearly wasn't a fog. I could smell smoke in the air, and this was before I heard about what was going on with the wildfires. And I just thought, well, is someone burning? But I didn't see any smoke, and it was all very odd. I just felt like, okay, something's going funky. I don't know what it is, but apparently there's a problem somewhere. And then later in the day, I find out about the wildfires, and of course, yeah, that is a pretty damn big problem, for sure. But it got me to thinking about how, we're getting this much softer version of what happened. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes Missouri and other Midwestern states, we do get, rather cataclysmic weather. Our tornadoes, our thunderstorms. There are times when that is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. But in general, it is always quieter. It is always once the weather pattern has lost a lot of its energy. It's had to travel halfway across the continent, wherever it originated from. We're far away from the oceans. We're far away from the Gulf of Mexico. We have a decent amount of distance from Canada, although in the winter, sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But, at all events, it's always this softer, reduced kind of impact. And I'm wondering if maybe that is reflecting the mood I was feeling within the soil itself today. Just very nuanced, very subtle. It's very calm. Maybe that is a better way. It's very calm, because usually the most extreme and destructive things aren't really happening here, and so it's much easier to have that sense of calm. And I wouldn't say security or safety, but just sense of the range of things to expect. That might be a better way of expressing it. And then this has also had me reflecting upon local cultures and attitudes. And I actually posted questions for Van at Brew. I don't mind it just, I'll be honest, I always better just from posting polls than I do posting an open-ended question. Eventually, we're going to have some brave souls decide to open up. See, I'm pulling it up. The question I asked was about regional idiosyncrasies, and I was just kind of curious about how people are perceiving the regions in which they live, their attitudes, their culture, and just what area of the country do they really consider as composing that region? Because you can divide us up in all sorts of different ways. And I'm just curious about what people on the individual levels are really thinking themselves. And I gave the example being in Missouri, I'm in the Midwest, we're very rural. We have lots of farming. We have some industry, and just we have a general culture that it doesn't tend to get overset about things, unless you're me. But there's a sense of people leaning towards being straightforward. We have the motto of being the show me state. And, we want people to show receipts, prove your case, have a solid line of reasoning, be grounded in reality to justify your opinions. And, in addition to that, there's also a tendency towards the informal, be very direct and be very practical. And then I kind of gave the example about some of the surrounding states I would consider as being kind of very similar in temperament. I said that, I did perceive two of the bordering states of Kentucky and Tennessee as being, much more Appalachian in their disposition. I mean, they're more mountainous, and, they tend to be more Southern in temperament, at least from what I've observed. And, and it just got me curious about, how do people perceive the flavor of their region and of their state, and what surrounding areas do they really see as being, kind of, part of the gang? Oh, and hello there we go. Hello to the American Folklore and Paranormal Podcast. Glad to have you here, sir. Very glad to have you here. But yes, I am curious about how people are perceiving this and what they're thinking and how they're processing it, because this is information that, while we're not finding a direct spiritual correlation of how does this affect my practice necessarily from the word go, but I feel like this is part of the soil that is going to eventually be supporting the foundation we build our faith upon. So this is why it's really occupying my mind. And then just for fun, I started pondering about, if I were to build a pagan temple in Missouri, about, what would I have it look like? And I've asked this question in surveys before, and I hope eventually someone will uh, share some opinions and what they've really been brainstorming about, because I think it's important to think about, because I mean, we could just kind of copy and paste, whatever we know of ancient temples, that our cousins across the seas used to build back in the day. I mean, we could do that. And, I don't think there would be anything necessarily wrong with that. I'm not going to condemn anyone who is building any kind of physical pagan temple, or who erects a stone circle, or creates any kind of physical center of worship for pagans in this country. I am not going to criticize anyone for doing that, or the manner in which it's done. The fact that they're undertaking the project, that is an honorable thing, and they have my wholehearted support in doing that. But I do think about, what would I do if, I had the money and, money was no object. If we're going to be creative and brainstorm, let's enjoy ourselves. I just asked, what would I do? And I thought a lot about the native stone. There's a lot of rock in our soil where I live. Not enough to really interfere with agriculture or anything like that, but there's a lot of rock in the soil. So I was thinking, well, if we were going to have a building, because sometimes you do want a building, suppose you all come together for ritual and it's pouring down the rain, or it's, dumping down the snow or something else, sometimes sometimes you just want to do things inside for very practical reasons. And I thought, if I was going to actually have this building, I do want to use stone from Missouri. I do want, for any lumber of the structure, I do want it to come, locally, if not this state, then certainly from our region. And then I thought about, motifs, because, you always have, something prettying up a temple, or any kind of architecture. And so I got to thinking about, okay, what do we all have in common? Because, I wouldn't want to build a temple, just for Norse pagans, or just for Celtic pagans, or just for Hellenistic pagans, or just for witches, or anything else like that. If you were going to build it, I would want it to have a common appeal, regardless of, the form of your faith or what deities you chose to work with. So I'm thinking, well, I mean, what we have in common really are our local animals, the landscape itself, the local plants, the native species. And I thought, maybe if we did have, maybe in the woodwork surrounding it, or if we erected, statues or anything of that kind, maybe have things that represent, say, the local deer. We have a massive deer population, or, common reptile species, fish, birds, whatever it is, anything that really is part of what it is to be here, because those are the immediate spiritual energies we are interacting with on a daily basis. I would want to see carvings that represented native species of plants. I want to use the local native rock. I want, when you look at that place, to just feel instinctively you are in Missouri, or at the very least that you are in the Midwest. You are in a pagan space, but you are in a pagan space in America, in the Midwest, in the state of Missouri. That's what I would really want people to just feel, down to their very bone structure. I want them to feel it that deep. And of course, outside, I would envision, creating a stone circle, because stone circles were pretty common in pagan areas. And then that got me to thinking about, well, close by to a lot of different temples, you usually traditionally in this country have places where you would bury your dead. And I thought about, different arrangements we might have, what kind of stones we might want to have that would actually represent our faith and our beliefs. And for those of us who work with the Norse gods, do we want an outline of stones around our grave that resembles the shape of a boat? I mean, maybe, and, and, and I know this seems like a weird thing to think about at first, but shouldn't we be working towards having spaces that actually are a reflection of us? I mean, I know that for a time, there was a certain amount of argument to be made in favor of being prudent and being discreet and not necessarily advertising who we are. But if we got to a stage where we were actually building temples and having indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, maybe set in lands where you have, forested areas nearby, you have trails you can go to, or, beauty spots that can be enjoyed, and places where people can really gather. Well, with all of that life, you also have, where do we keep our dead? How do we honor them? How do we make that arrangement? And, let's at least start thinking about it. Even if it isn't our generation that gets it done, let's have some thoughts to pass down to the next generation. So now for the big question. And this one is a doozy. It is controversial. I am prepared for any random objects that get thrown in my general direction, because I know it'll be upsetting to some people, but we're Americans, and upsetting people is kind of what we do. So let's talk about it. The question of whether or not an American pantheon of gods is forming right before our eyes. This is a possibility that was raised in conversation by Azamutu, who's a member of Blackbird's Brew. And when he was outlining his line of reasoning for it, I just instinctively felt like he's onto something here. there might be some kind of convergence that we hadn't really thought about before, but it might be taking place. And that might be part of the reason why a lot of us are starting to look for, well, what is our common ground when it comes to paganism? What is the common ground when it comes to witchcraft? And are we, are all of our cultural influences, infusing one into the other, and has this resulted in something that's unique? And is that also reflected in the gods? Do they have relationships between pantheons? And how might this all work if it is happening? And it's I've not been able to get this out of my brain, and I hope other people have not been able to get it out of their brain, because I think this is a very relevant question to us, and it is core to what this project is all about. Now, you think about it. America is a nation that is formed by many peoples, and that means we are, by natural extension, linked by both blood and spirit to many different pantheons of gods, which, at a bare minimum, does suggest that the gods at least all have a presence here, regardless of what pantheon they originated from. And in the Blackbirds Brew group, we are frequently and consistently observing various different people connected to different gods of different pantheons. And it's like they're just being thrown into each other's past, and they're discovering they have common values, they have common shared principles, they have common concerns about what's going on culturally and politically and religiously. And they're kind of connecting up with one another, and even starting to share experiences. And that indicates to me that our gods are probably communicating to each other. And then the question becomes, does this suspected communication rise to the level of coordination? And how can we test the hypothesis, and what would actually substantiate it if there is really something to it? Now, if you follow my channel and the channel of my friend and colleague, Georgia Liberty, you know that we're both big on principles. We are forever nagging people at least once a week about the importance of principles, the need to apply them, and taking all of the principles and the thoughts associated with them to their logical conclusion. Now, if we take that approach and we apply it to this project and this particular question, are the gods coming together in some fashion? One magical principle that I keep looking at is, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. In other words, all of reality manifests on both the spiritual and the mundane levels. So, with that in mind, I'm thinking, is there anything we can point to in the mundane world that could be taken as a reflection of a merging in the spiritual realm? That's what I'm doing, at least at this particular stage. And one thing I can point to is that the people who seem to have a genuinely American spirit, they aren't just American on paper, or but they actually have imbibed the American spirit. They seem to have a pretty common desire to allow the evolution of our culture, that is blending peoples, and everything, peoples and customs and cultures, and how we really define ourselves in an everyday way, that to allow to naturally blend and converge and form a common ground upon which we can all build upon. I'm seeing that in people. These aren't people who want to deconstruct everything to death. They're looking for common ground. They're finding common ground, and that's what they really want to emphasize. And then from that point, differences, it's just kind of interesting flavors. That's the individuality. It adds to the overall whole. But those those differences are not pulling apart the areas of genuine commonality. So the question is that going on amongst the people who actually do feel this way? Is any of that reflected by the gods? Is this a mirror image of the gods? Is this a sign that what we're doing amongst ourselves is something that the gods have already previously done? Possibly. Do I have proof? Of course not. But it does seem to be worth entertaining the idea, particularly for something as important as this. Another possible marker that I look to is just the genetic integration of Americans. Even if someone's ancestors all came from the same continent, for me, I think it's pretty obvious that the vast majority of my ancestors were most definitely of European extraction. But they still came from different ethnic tribes on the continent. Um, And this is what the case for people, whether they're from Europe or Africa, Asia, or whatever else. Even if your ancestors all came from the same continent, the odds are pretty high that they still came from different tribes. And those tribes weren't necessarily in the habit of intermarrying before they arrived on American shores, particularly not at scale. So, as we are as a people, the consequence of this coming together, and as we have already established, we are children of the gods, literally and figuratively. It does seem to indicate that this means effectively that the various pantheons now all have grandchildren in common, which means that they have a shared vested interest in what goes on with us as individuals, as a whole, and that would, of course, incorporate what is going on the spiritual level. Now, is this proof that the gods actually are collaborating together? No, but it does raise the possibility. And then the third thing I've looked about is that in addition to the native species of animals, plants, and whatnot that we also have non-native species that have been imported here, and some of them have become naturalized over time. And of course, our own kin, once they came to the shore and when they shed the mortal coil, we bury them or, cremate them, but still, we are putting them in the ground, and they are then becoming a part of that soil. And that ancestral tie to the soil itself has always been a very important principle in paganism. I mean, you will see that even the formation of during the Viking Age, of when they started settling in places like Iceland, it was very important that they established a relationship with the land until such time as, you started having people being buried there, where you would have that tie of kin in the soil itself. And once this occurs, as it has been occurring over a number of generations now, that is a literal blending of the old world and the new. And so we have a blending of the material and the spiritual components of many places and peoples, all of which have links to various pantheons. So, from our own studies of the gods, we know that certain things are very sacred to certain deities, and, a lot of them are right here. They don't stop being sacred to them just because they're in a different place. And so that's another infusion of the gods, and it's interacting with everything else. And this is just another example of them sharing space on both the mundane and the spiritual level. And of course, we don't know if this means that, they're cooperating or forming an alliance, or if, essentially all of the gods are essentially our pantheon, and we're going to have to figure out how to interact with them. But I think this does illustrate the need to actually explore the question. And that's very much where I have been with this week. Exploring the question and thinking about what possible things can we point to in the natural world, in our day-to-day lives, things that we can see, hear, smell, touch, and feel. What can we point to that might substantiate this theory? Because I think that's when we could actually find ourselves on solid ground. Because again, if it's happening above, it's happening below. If it's within, you will find it without. If it's part of the universe, you will find it down to the very level of your soul. There's always that interconnection between the micro level and the macro level, and that's what we're looking for. Now, again, I don't want to say that I am coming to you with absolute conclusive proof, because I don't have conclusive proof. I have some questions. I have some questions that I would really like to hear other people react to and think about, and also bring their own observations to, because we're all looking at this from a different vantage point. But if from those different vantage points we're seeing common themes, then we can really get somewhere. And that's really what has motivated a lot of the poll questions and a lot of my own personal explorations of trying to become more connected to where I am locally. It is about looking for all of those ties. Because, as I've mentioned in previous broadcasts, I'm really tired of the naysayers. I'm really tired of the people who do nothing but criticize us. I'm really tired of everyone who keeps telling us that we're doing it wrong. I mean, and in fact, Georgia Liberty and I, we were having a conversation yesterday about some of the misplaced snobbery from certain witches who are very sure that they've got it right, and everyone else involved in witchcraft has got it wrong. And that's always baffled her. Because she studied the basics, and then she started interacting with her environment wherever she was, taking lessons from everything that was happening to her, and seeing the mirror image reflected on the spiritual level and what that means. And she gained a lot of insight through that. And you will find that with a lot of either eclectic witches or solitary witches, we tend to go through a very similar process. We have to prove to ourselves essentially that the theory is real. And once we see that it's real, then we're thinking, okay, what does this mean? What is it connected to? And so that's probably why George and I are kind of taking a similar stance on this when it comes to this particular project of I need to see something I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I can prove. Because if I can see that for sure, then I know there's something to my spiritual thought. And this is, I think, one of the ways we've navigated and the way we've tended to weed out ideas that perhaps are very popular amongst some, but don't have a good foundation. This is our way of, separating the wheat, from the chaff, so to speak. And I'm curious about what other process that people are going through, because we do think differently. We all do process information very differently. And as we go through this project and kind of think about these things more deeply, I want to make sure, and I want to at least invite people who do have a different line of reasoning, who do have a different thought process, who look at the world much differently than I do, that they are contributing to that conversation, because they're going to speak to the people to whom, I can't reach, who I can't connect with. There are different mindsets, different mentalities that, anything I say is just, it's not, they're like, yeah, I'm not on her wavelength. And this isn't about intelligence. It's just about like, no, everything that's important to her, that's not really where my priorities are. And, and I want to see, I want to see someone able to reach different kinds of people. And which is why I'm really hoping that this project does take off and we start seeing more people take an interest into it. And hello to Georgia, virtual hug back. Much loves, much loves. Oh, that pretty much wraps up a lot of the thoughts that I had. I was hoping that people would be a little bit more back and forth with me this morning, but Rumble messed up on me, and so we're only streaming on YouTube, and so that creates a definite problem. But yeah, just I want to make sure the lines of communications keep open, and we start thinking about not only what do we think, but why do we think? How did we arrive at the conclusions that we did? Because there's a lot of ideas floating around in my head right now, and it feels like I'm onto something instinctively, but I haven't been able to properly articulate them. And that's very frustrating, but it also means that if I can't articulate them to myself, I'm not going to be able to articulate them to other people. And so that is, a little roadblock I'm working through at the moment. There's a lot of stray thoughts that kind of go through my head. I like the idea about where are people feeling connected. Well, okay, why are they feeling more easily connected in certain environments? Does it have to do with their astrological arrangements in the natal chart? Does it have to do with the kind of environment that's very familiar to them, that they're used to, that they like? I mean, one example was Rose. She said that she really felt that connection with the forest, but also with the Appalachian Mountains. And she said about how often in her childhood they would go on family vacations there. Clearly that forged a bond, and that is able to instantly get into her more spiritual mode and be able to properly connect. I mean, that's a huge thing. So I am looking for explanations, and I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all explanation for any of this. And I definitely don't think that every region of the United States is going to end up having the same flavor of paganism, not by any stretch of the imaginations. Kind of what I am suspecting is that the region that you're in is going to have a really profound impact. What are you actually dealing with there? For instance, if you're in an area that is experiencing wildfires, you're going to be dealing with much different energies, both a mundane and magical level, than what I'm dealing with here in the Midwest. Forest fires aren't really a thing. I can't really remember anything like that happening here, and we do have forests. I mean, and maybe that's down to just maybe we just have more sensible forest management. I mean, that definitely plays a role, but we also don't have as much area covered by forest, which is another thing that absolutely plays into it. We're going to discover practical differences. I mean, and I always use the example of, people who live close to the ocean. You're going to have a very different spiritual experience from people who live in the interior. If you live in the South, that will be different from people in the North. So I think we will start seeing these things, and it won't be the result of someone having a divine revelation. It'll simply be if these things have come up as practical considerations of where we live. I don't know how long the member of Blackbird's Brew, Druid Fox, has talked about how she really postpones celebrating certain things until her weather is actually reflecting it. She lives in Minnesota. So, I mean, the poor woman sometimes has to wait quite a while before she gets to celebrate spring, let alone summer. And, and before she can hardly catch her breath, it's back into fall. And then, oh, now we're going to have 6 months of winter. And that's just what it is. She and other pagans in that area, they are absolutely going to over time naturally evolve different customs that will look different than say my friend Georgia Liberty. She's in the South right now. They don't have eons of months of winter. She does not get buckets of snow. And so her interactions with those seasons will be very different. And it's wonderful we have an online space where we can compare notes with each other. And we can hear that line of reasoning, because sometimes what makes sense to do will absolutely be just a question of where someone lives. And that's something that I don't think we've really had sufficient appreciation for in the modern era, but we see traces of it. We know that there were certain regional celebrations that were more prominent in one place in Europe that, wasn't really a thing in others. And a lot of it just had to do with where are you living? How do people earn their living? How do people survive there? What terrain are you dealing with? What crops can you grow? 1,000 different things that are just purely practical considerations. And and I know that some people might feel like, oh, you're trying to take the spark and the romance and the magic out of paganism and out of witchcraft. But no, I don't think that we are. I don't think we lose that by coming to terms with reality and saying that things are going to be different for very practical, very mundane reasons. I don't think that's taking away from it. I think that's allowing us to clear away the fog of some of our illusions, to be able to accept or dismiss some of the lines of reasonings presented to us by previous generations who they were having to break up that soil. They were having to do a lot of basic groundwork. And because they were having to do that, and they really had to do a lot of things to pave our way, there are certain questions that, because of the nature of the work given to their generation, they didn't flesh out some of these ideas, not because they were less capable, not because they were less spiritual, not because they were less sincere, but just because that wasn't the work being given to them to do. And for our generation, we have a different task. We need to continue cultivating that soil that was gifted to us. And that also means, asking some of the questions that the previous generation didn't have the time to ask or didn't think to ask. And of course, the generation after us, they'll be going into different territory too. And, what's going on with the rest of the non-pagan world, that's going to impact us as well. And Georgia Liberty says it makes us valid. Yes, it does. It really, really does. And when we come to, people like to throw around that word diversity. And I swear to the gods, if I hear one of these leftist lunatics use the word diversity one more time, I'm just going to lose my faculties because they're not using the word properly. They're using it in their nasty, culty way. But, if you want to talk about actual diversity, it's allowing for people to have similar practices that are harmonious in spirit, but are still tailored for their environment. And just as though, there are certain things that we tend to share. Let's say it's just the witchcraft community. There are certain things that we tend to share and have in common, because anything that we're doing that actually works, it's because it's working in accordance with natural law. And of course, natural law is it's a constant no matter where you are on earth. So we do have a lot of common ground that's a bit easier for us to find, just because of the nature of what we do. But in addition to, the things that we have in common, we also have our own deeply personal journey, dealing with some foibles, healing from past bad experiences, the cultivation of our own particular psychic talents. We all have a very individualized journey, and a lot of our interactions with the gods, I think one of the reasons why sometimes those relationships are so personal aren't only because, we're actually reaching out and talking to the gods and say, hi, I want to talk to you. Do you want to talk to me back? And then sometimes in dream work and in meditation, they do. And sometimes it is actually even very conversational. But the reason why it is so personal and so specific, and why sometimes the lessons we learn for ourselves aren't really applicable to others, is because it's about our issues, what's going on inside our heads, what the experiences of our souls have been. And while, a lot of our principles are easily transferable, those intensely personal experiences, they are just for us. And that's another thing that sometimes we forget about, that the secrecy associated with the craft. Sometimes it's just because you've been wrestling with issues that weren't really anybody else's business. It was just between you and the gods, and you were sorting some things out, and it's not going to have relevance for other people. That's another thing. And I think we can break up the mentality of one size fits all, or there's only one right way to do things, because that's something that I think a lot of pagans give lip service to. But once you start really getting down to the nitty gritty, there are strong opinions about what's suitable and what's not, and there isn't always a very good argument to back that up. Some people's like, well, that's what we know from our ancestors, so anything different, it's obviously wrong and bad, and you're LARPing. No, no, it isn't. Not necessarily. And it's the same thing that people complain about. Well, someone watched a Viking show and now people are interested in the Norse gods. I think that's horrible. Well, no, no, it isn't. Maybe that did pique someone's curiosity, but if they go on and study and they actually get to meet the Norse gods, they're not going to be basing their spirituality on something that Hollywood did. Yeah, I think we've got to be a little bit more open minded, because I think the gods are using whatever tools they deem appropriate to try to catch our ears. And once they have those ears, that's when things, start getting sorted out. And then people learn about, oh, okay, this is the surviving information. There's probably a good reason why the lore that survived has survived. It gives us what we need to rebuild. It's not just about rebuilding and reconstructing the past. It's also about, you're on different land. You're in a different era. You're doing different things. It's okay to incorporate that. And not only okay, you need to. You need to make your spirituality relevant to the day and age in which you live and relevant to yourself. And you need to set that example and talk about that process so that others who are exploring that on their own, so that they have an idea of how it's done. Even if their journey ultimately looks different, or they're dealing with different issues than what you yourself are, if they see someone is just going about their business, doing the work and figuring out how to make themselves whole and to attune themselves with their environment, the gods, the land spirits, all of that. If they see someone doing that and they see that it's possible, that helps them figure out how to do that for themselves. That is part of passing it on. And that's part of creating, an American pagan legacy, or a pagan legacy anywhere on the world. So that's my thoughts, and I've rambled for almost an hour. Thank you ever so much for joining me here. My apologies if you went to Rumble first. I don't know what happened with Rumble. It started out fine, and then it just poofed on me, which that's weird. I'm thinking that's a technical issue on Rumble's part, but that's also why sometimes I do a dual live stream on YouTube. So if Rumble goes down, we at least have YouTube, and of course I can download this and upload it on Rumble, where, hopefully a wider audience will see it. But thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to American Folklore and Paranormal Podcast and Wiccan Conservative, aka Georgia Liberty, for commenting and being with me and having a little bit of interaction that makes for better conversation. And you don't know how much I appreciate it. It really makes things better. But yeah, I think I better get off here, stop rambling, let you guys get back to your day. And of course, if you didn't catch the beginning, you can always watch the playback. So there we are. Come see us on Gilded. Link in the description to join us below. And bye-bye.